They called the old man useless and laughed as he faced the wild stallion. Minutes later, their laughter turned to stunned silence. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and follow for more powerful stories that will stay with you. Now, let's begin. The midday sun bore down mercilessly on the sprawling ranch of Ironwind, nestled somewhere in the arid plains of Texas, its name now echoing more like a curse than a proud legacy. Henry Vaughn stood at the edge of the paddock, his gaze narrowed against the glare as he studied the defiant black stallion that had upended the entire rhythm of his estate. For 3 long weeks, since the creature had set hoof on his land, life at the ranch had twisted into a daily struggle between pride and failure. What was meant to be a prized addition to his growing line of thoroughbreds had turned into a living emblem of defeat. The wranglers had started calling him Black Diablo, fitting, given his temperament. He stood at the heart of the corral like a dark statue, nostrils flared, eyes sharp as blades, daring anyone to come closer. Along the wooden fence, 5 of the best horse tamers in the Southwest leaned in silence, watching the stallion with a mix of reverence and dread. Mike, the most seasoned of them all, wiped blood from his brow and muttered, "Boss, that horse has got the devil running through his veins." His voice was raw, pain woven into every word. It was his 3rd try this week, and his 3rd time being violently thrown into the dirt. "I haven't seen anything like this in 30 years, he added, shaking his head. Henry's jaw tightened. The situation was spiraling. The stallion had cost a small fortune, and now his reputation as a breeder was being dragged through the dust. Word had already spread across the region about the beast that broke every man who dared to challenge it. "Maybe it's time we put him down, sir," Rory, the foreman, suggested quietly, leaning close so no one else could hear, "before he seriously hurts someone." "No!" Henry's voice was sharp, unyielding. "You don't kill an animal like this over wounded pride, Rory. This stallion carries the purest bloodline in all of Spain. His blood is gold for our breeding stock." At that moment, young Alex, Rory's youngest son and the newest member of the ranch crew, stepped forward with cautious resolve. Barely 19, he was known for his reckless bravery, but today, his eyes held something else, the glimmer of an idea. "Henry," he said in a hushed tone, "I remembered something my grandfather once told me. A story about an old horseman who lived up in the Appalachian Highlands hills. His name was Dominic Ferris." A murmur rippled through the group. Some of the older hands exchanged quiet, meaningful glances. "Dominic? The Portuguese?" Mike asked, suddenly intrigued. "I thought he'd passed years ago." "No, sir. My cousin saw him in town just a few weeks back. He lives like a hermit now, but he's still alive." Henry's brows drew together, stirring a dust-covered memory. Dominic Ferris. The name carried whispers of a forgotten era, an age when ancient wisdom still held sway. He had once worked for Henry's father, decades ago, before vanishing without a trace. They said he could talk to horses. Encouraged by the group's silence, Alex continued, "He could tame even the wildest horses without force or fear. Just patience, and some kind of strange gift no one could quite explain." Rory gave a dry laugh. "Old wives' tales. That man's gotta be over 70. He probably can't even ride a donkey, let alone break Black Diablo." But Henry said nothing. His eyes followed the stallion as it moved like a shadowed monarch across the corral, every muscle rippling, every step echoing defiance. The mention of Dominic had opened something buried deep inside, a flash of childhood, a vision of the man turning a wild, furious horse into a quiet, loyal partner in just hours, using nothing but silence, stillness, and something like grace. "Bring me Dominic Ferris," he said at last, in a voice that allowed no argument. "Offer him whatever it takes." "For wounded pride, Rory. This stallion carries the purest bloodline in all of Spain. His blood is gold for our breeding stock." "Henry," he said in a hushed tone, "I remembered something my grandfather once told me." "Bring me Dominic Ferris," he said at last, in a voice that allowed no argument. Offer him whatever it takes." The men exchanged surprised glances. Rory looked like he was about to object, but a sharp glare from his boss cut him off. "What if he refuses, sir?" asked Mike, giving voice to the unspoken tension thick in the air. Henry's eyes shifted toward the black stallion, who now watched them as if he understood every word. "Tell him," he said, his tone layered with mystery. "I have something that belongs to him, something he lost a long time ago." As the men left to carry out their orders, Henry stood alone, eyes locked on the wild creature. For a breathless moment, man and beast regarded one another from afar, like rivals silently measuring each other's strength. "You've met your match, devil," the ranch owner murmured. What secrets will Dominic bring with him this time? What Henry hadn't told his men was that the old horseman hadn't left the family's land by choice, and that Dominic's return could unearth questions buried for nearly 30 years. Questions about loyalty, betrayal, and a silent pact that once bound the two most powerful families in the region. 3 days passed before a solitary figure appeared on the horizon, walking slowly along the dusty road that led to the Ironwind Ranch. The late afternoon sun cast a long shadow in front of him, announcing his arrival before his features could be made out. Alex spotted him first and rushed to alert Henry. "Sir, I think it's him. The old man, Dominic. He's coming." Soon, a small crowd began to gather in the ranch's courtyard. Farmhands left their work, stable boys abandoned their chores, and even the cooks peeked out from the kitchen to witness the return of the legendary horse whisperer. A heavy mix of wonder, doubt, and curiosity hung in the air. The man kept approaching, carrying nothing but a weathered leather satchel slung over one shoulder. His stride was steady yet cautious, each step placed with deliberate care. As he crossed the threshold of the ranch gates, a hush fell over the crowd, thick enough to touch. Dominic Ferris was unmistakably marked by time. His sun-worn face was carved with deep lines, silent testaments to decades lived beneath the unforgiving sky. His once midnight black hair had turned completely white, trimmed close to his scalp. He wore simple clothes, faded cotton pants, a long-sleeved white shirt, and a leather vest softened by age. In his calloused hands he held a wide-brimmed hat, offering silent respect as he entered someone else's land. But it was his eyes that held the crowd. Blue, sharp, alive. Eyes that hadn't aged a day. Eyes that seemed to pierce through the dust of the years and right into the soul. Mike was the first to break the silence, his voice laced with mockery. "This is the great tamer? Looks like he can barely stay on his feet." Nervous chuckles fluttered among the younger workers, while the older ones kept a wary distance. Dominic didn't flinch. He stood firm, untouched by the ridicule, almost as if he'd been expecting it. "He probably learned to break horses back when folks still rode dinosaurs," snorted Ray, a trainer who'd once been humiliated by the Black Devil. The laughter swelled, until it was suddenly snuffed out. Henry had stepped out onto the balcony of the main house. He descended the steps slowly, his gaze fixed on the returning man. There was something unusual in his expression, a blend of reverence and unease, as if he were coming face to face not just with an old acquaintance, but with a long-buried truth. "Dominic," said Henry, extending his hand as the old man approached. "Thank you for coming." The aging horseman paused, staring at the offered hand for a long, loaded moment before finally accepting it. "I didn't come for you, Henry," he replied, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence like a blade. "I came for the horse." The frost in the exchange was unmistakable, and hushed murmurs stirred among the gathered men. Rory, the ranch foreman, stepped forward with a skeptical frown. "Henry can't be serious," he muttered. "This man's closer to a coffin than a saddle. That beast's gonna finish him before he even gets close." Others chimed in with mocking laughter. "Maybe we should dig his grave now. Save ourselves the trouble later," someone called out, setting off another wave of chuckles. "If he manages to ride that devil, I'll clean out every barn stall on the ranch for a whole month," another wagered, grinning. Henry raised his hand sharply, and the air snapped back into silence. "That's enough," he said, his voice cracking like a bullwhip.
This man is a guest on my land and he will be treated with respect.
Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to leave, right now. Tension thickened the quiet that followed. Dominic looked from face to face, his eyes calm but cutting, as if he wasn't just studying the men, but measuring the weight of their character. "Show me the animal," he said at last, ignoring the lingering disbelief in their expressions. "First, come in, eat, rest a bit," Henry offered. "You've come a long way." "I didn't come to rest," Dominic said. "I came to work." For a heartbeat, the two men simply stared at one another. Between them passed a wordless exchange, one made of old memories, scars, and the kind of trust forged only in time. "As you wish," Henry relented, gesturing toward the main corral. "The Black Devil is waiting." As the old man walked toward the fence line, a young ranch hand, Alex, approached him with visible awe. "Mr. Dominic, it's an honor to meet you, sir. My grandfather used to tell me stories about the way you worked with horses." Dominic turned to the boy, and for the first time, a faint smile tugged at the edges of his weathered face. "What was your grandfather's name, son?" "Sam Sanders, sir." Recognition flashed in the old man's eyes. Sam had a gift, kind hands, and eyes as honest as yours. They reached the corral. In the center stood the black stallion, powerful and alone, like a shadow made flesh. At the sound of their approach, the horse lifted its head, flared its nostrils, and fixed its gaze on them, wild and unblinking. Dominic halted several feet from the fence, staring at the animal with a stillness so profound it seemed to stop time itself. No one spoke. The whole ranch held its breath as man and beast sized each other up. "What do they call him?" Dominic asked, eyes still locked on the horse. "Black Devil," Mike answered. Only the devil himself could be that savage. Dominic shook his head slowly. "Names carry weight. You've damned him before you ever gave him a chance." He began to unbutton his worn-out vest, exposing a faded work shirt beneath. Along his bare forearm, a jagged old scar twisted from his wrist to his elbow, like history etched into flesh. "What's the plan, old man?" Ray scoffed, failing to hide his contempt. "You gonna charm him with your ancient voodoo?" Dominic didn't respond. He turned instead to Henry. "I need to be alone with him. No audience, no noise." A wave of disappointed grumbling rose from the ranch hands. "This is ridiculous. We're gonna miss the whole show. He just doesn't want to get embarrassed in front of everyone." Henry raised his hand again, but before he could speak, Dominic beat him to it. "If strength and youth couldn't tame him, what makes you think watching an old man will teach you anything?" He asked, his voice calm in a way that unsettled everyone around him. True knowledge doesn't scream for attention like a sideshow act. Rory stepped forward, irritation flashing in his eyes. "This is nonsense, boss. We can't just—" "Quiet," ordered Henry, his tone ironclad, brooking no argument. "We'll do as Dominic asks. All of you, step back. We'll return at sundown." "But sir," the foreman began, but Henry cut him off, locking eyes with each of his men. "Just watch," he said firmly. "Watch and learn." Grudgingly, the ranch hands pulled away. As they dispersed, Dominic turned his gaze to the stallion that stood at the center of the corral. The space between them wasn't just physical. It was the vast chasm between two untamed forces, one young and wild, the other aged and enduring. "Let's find out your real name," the old man whispered, now alone with the animal. What no one saw was the glimmer in Henry's eyes as he noticed the scar on Dominic's arm, a faded mark that spoke of a story buried deep in a past he preferred not to revisit. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the Oklahoma hills when Henry returned to the main pen, followed closely by a crew of uneasy ranch hands. The air between them was thick with anticipation. Some were certain they'd find old Dominic battered, maybe worse. Others, more prone to tales and whispers, muttered about the strange powers the man supposedly wielded. Mike, walking ahead with Henry, was the first to stop cold, his body stiff with disbelief. The others, catching up, froze beside him, eyes wide and jaws slack. There, in the heart of the pen, where just hours before the fury of the Black Devil had reigned, an impossible scene unfolded. Dominic sat calmly on a low log, while the black stallion, once the terror of the Iron Wind Ranch, grazed peacefully just a few feet away. No rope, no halter, just an unspoken understanding bridging the space between man and beast. "Sweet Mother of God," Ray whispered, crossing himself. "This is witchcraft." Alex stared, wonder written all over his face. How did he do that? Henry said nothing, but the look in his eyes hinted at a deeper truth he wasn't ready to voice. Dominic slowly stood as he noticed the group approaching. The stallion raised its head, alert, but no longer menacing. The old horseman stepped toward the animal with slow, intentional steps, murmuring words too soft for anyone else to catch. Then, to everyone's amazement, he gently laid his hand on the stallion's neck. "Boss," Dominic called, never looking away from the horse. "Only you may enter." The ranch hands exchanged uncertain glances, but Henry didn't hesitate. He pushed open the gate, stepped inside, and shut it quietly behind him. He walked with care toward Dominic and the stallion. "How?" he asked simply, once he was close enough not to be overheard. The old man stroked the stallion's sleek neck before speaking. "I didn't tame him. I just listened." At last, Dominic turned to face him. "This horse isn't wild by nature, Henry. He's wild because he's afraid." Henry's brow furrowed. "Afraid?" "He took down 5 of the best wranglers in the county." Dominic nodded. "Because they tried to bend his will. They came to break his spirit." Dominic paused, his piercing blue eyes locked onto the hacendados with a calm intensity, just as his own father had once looked at him, decades ago. The silence that hung between them was thick, woven with untold stories and wounds that had never fully healed. "The past is the past," Henry finally said, his voice low. "Not all of it," Dominic replied, lifting his arm to reveal the long scar etched across it. "Some things linger," he added, his words floating into the stillness like a whisper with no need for an answer. Turning back to the stallion, the old horseman leaned in, whispering gently into the animal's ear. Then, to Henry's astonishment, he swung himself onto the horse's back. No saddle, no reins, just a graceful, fluid motion, as if his body remembered something it had done 1,000 times before. "Open the gate," Dominic called. "You sure about this?" A quiet, mysterious smile played across the old man's weathered face. "I want your men to see what trust can truly accomplish." Without another word, Henry stepped toward the gate and swung it open. Outside, the ranch hands instinctively backed away, bracing for the stallion's infamous fury. But what happened next would become legend on that ranch. A moment seared into the minds of everyone who witnessed it. With nothing but his knees and a few softly spoken words, Dominic guided the wild stallion into a smooth trot. Horse and man moved as one, their rhythm so perfectly synchronized it felt like watching a dance choreographed by nature itself. Around the wide courtyard they went, where the other workers had begun to gather, drawn by the whispers of the impossible. "Come here, Alex," Dominic called, bringing the horse to a stop near the young man who had once stood up for him. "Reach out your hand." Alex hesitated, glancing anxiously at Henry, who gave him an encouraging nod. His hand trembled as he extended it toward the beast, the same beast who, just days before, had sent grown men twice his size to the ER, now gently lowered his head and allowed Alex to touch his muzzle. "His name is Sombra," Dominic said. "Not a demon. Never was. Just a spirit." "Misunderstood," Alex murmured, his eyes wide with awe as he repeated, "Sombra," stunned by the gentleness of the creature now nuzzling his palm. Dominic dismounted with surprising agility for a man his age and handed Alex a small wild apple. "Offer it with an open palm. It's a sign of trust." The boy obeyed, And when the horse accepted the gift with delicate care, a quiet gasp of admiration rippled through the onlookers. Rory, the foreman, stepped forward, suspicion etched into every line of his face. "How'd you do it, old man? What kind of trick was that?" Dominic met his glare with a calm that disarmed. "No trick. Just 3 things you never gave him. Time, respect, and silence." "That's not possible," Mike cut in, still skeptical. "No man can tame a horse like that in a matter of hours." "I didn't tame him," Dominic replied, his voice steady. "I earned his trust. There's a difference. A difference most folks don't care to understand." Henry, who had been quietly observing, finally stepped forward. "Dominic didn't just show us how to handle a horse today. He gave us a lesson in something much deeper." The ranch hands stood in thoughtful silence. Some looked unconvinced, others profoundly moved. "How did you know?" Ray asked, breaking the quiet. "How did you know he wouldn't attack?" The old horseman gently ran his hand down the stallion's neck before answering. "I looked into his eyes. Eyes never lie. Not an animal's, not a man's." His gaze flicked briefly to Henry, then back to the crowd. This horse didn't need to be broken. He needed to be understood. As the workers slowly dispersed, murmuring about the miracle they'd just witnessed, Henry approached Dominic once more. "Stay for dinner," he said. "We've got a lot to catch up on." Dominic hesitated. The weight of so many years spent in chosen solitude hung heavily between them. "I'm not even sure there's anything left to say between us after all this time." The farmer's gaze stretched toward the horizon, where the sun was slowly sinking into a blaze of crimson and gold. "Some truths deserve to be spoken, old friend. About my father, the scar on your arm, and about Teresa." The name fell between them like a stone into a still pond, rippling outward, stirring echoes from decades long past. Dominic, usually composed expression, wavered, just for a breath, before settling back into stoic silence. "Teresa," he echoed, barely above a whisper. "I thought we agreed never to say that name again." "Some promises," Henry replied, "should never have been made in the first place, especially the ones born from lies." The old horseman studied the farmer for a long, wordless moment, as if reading beyond what was said. At last, he gave a barely noticeable nod. "Well then," he murmured, "let's eat." Side by side, the 2 men made their way toward the main house. Behind them, the black stallion, no longer a wild beast but a calm shadow, followed obediently, guided only by Alex's steady hand on its neck. The young man, trailing a few steps behind, watched the older men with growing curiosity. There was something unspoken hanging in the air between them, some long-buried secret poised on the edge of revelation. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he felt deeply, almost instinctively, that his own story was tied to theirs. What none of them noticed was the lone figure watching from a second-floor window of the house. A middle-aged woman with dark, weary eyes that had already shed a lifetime's worth of tears. Tears for a forbidden love, for a child lost, and for a truth she had long dreaded might finally come to light. "He came back, Teresa," she whispered to herself. "After all these years, Dominic came back, came." The dining room, bathed in soft light from an ornate crystal chandelier, felt both lavish and hollow all at once. Shadows flickered across the walls, where portraits of the Vaughn family lined the room, generations of stern-faced men watching silently as an unexpected reunion unfolded beneath their painted eyes. Dominic, now washed and wearing freshly laundered clothes borrowed from Henry, looked oddly out of place in the high-backed carved chair. His calloused hands, shaped by years of labor and simplicity, fidgeted uneasily on the starched white tablecloth. Teresa entered like a breeze barely rustling the air, quiet, careful, almost afraid of being seen. At 55, she still carried the grace and quiet dignity that had always marked her presence, though time had etched gentle lines across her face. Her black hair, now laced with strands of silver, was swept into a modest bun that framed her delicate features. When her eyes met Dominic, time seemed to pause. 30 years of silence, Longing and unresolved truth passed between them in a single, aching glance. "Teresa," Dominic breathed, rising from his chair almost without realizing it. "Dominic," she replied, her voice composed, though it trembled with emotion she couldn't quite hide. "I never imagined I'd see you in this house again." Henry observed them quietly, his face unreadable. "Please have a seat. The food is getting cold." For several minutes, only the faint clink of cutlery broke the uneasy silence. It was Teresa who finally found the courage to speak. "I saw what you did with the horse today. Alex hasn't stopped talking about it." Dominic gave a quiet nod. "The boy's got a good heart, and gentle hands for the creatures." "He has his grandfather's eyes," Teresa added, her words laced with a deeper meaning that didn't go unnoticed. Henry set down his fork and took a slow, deliberate breath. "Enough beating around the bush. We didn't ask Dominic here to talk about horses or Alex's eyes." Teresa stiffened noticeably. "Henry, I don't think 30 years is long enough for lies, Teresa." The rancher cut in, calm but unwavering. Then he turned to Dominic. "You've always had a question, one you never stopped carrying." The old horse trainer looked at the man before him for a long, silent moment. Then, finally, he asked, "What happened to my son?" The words didn't fall so much as they hung there, like a ghost materializing in the room. Teresa shut her eyes for a moment, as if bracing herself against a blow. "Our son," Henry corrected softly, to Dominic's stunned surprise. "Though I didn't know it until years later, after my father had already driven you off this land." "What are you saying?" Dominic asked, voice cracking under the weight of decades of buried pain and confusion. Teresa opened her eyes, now glistening with tears she refused to let fall. "When Frank, Henry's father, found out about us," she began, "I was already pregnant. You were thrown out, falsely accused of theft." "And branded," Dominic added, raising his arm to show the scar, the letters THEF carved into his skin, burned in as a sentence that never faded. "My father was a hard man," Henry said quietly. "He couldn't stand the idea that the woman promised to his son had fallen in love with a simple Portuguese trainer. He gave me two choices," Teresa went on, her voice catching. "Swear the child was Henry's, since we were already engaged, or watch them turn you over to the law for a crime you never committed." Dominic closed his eyes, letting the truth crash down over him like a storm. "And the child?" he asked. "He grew up as my son," Henry answered. "I always knew he wasn't mine by blood. Teresa and I married as our families expected, but we were never more than companions bound by a shared lie." "Rory," Dominic breathed, the name rising like dawn breaking through clouds. "Rory is my son, the foreman." Teresa gave a slow, solemn nod. "And Alex is your grandson." The silence that followed ran deep, like time itself holding its breath, allowing space for their souls to absorb the weight of what had been unburied. "Why bring me back after all these years?" Dominic finally asked, turning to Henry. The landowner rose from his chair and walked to the window, where the Texas night had already cloaked the fields in quiet darkness. "Because I'm dying, Dominic. A tumor the doctors can't remove. They've given me just a few months." Teresa lowered her gaze. The news wasn't new to her. "Before I go," Henry continued, "I wanted to right at least one of my father's wrongs. You deserve the truth, and Rory deserves to know who his real father is." "He doesn't know?" Dominic asked, stunned. "No," Teresa replied. "He thinks he's Henry's son, like everyone else on the ranch." Dominic stood suddenly, his chair scraping sharply across the wooden floor. 30 years, he whispered. 30 years lost." "Not completely lost," said Henry, turning around. "Your son grew up strong and honorable. He has your hands for working with horses, your determination, and now you have the chance to know him. Maybe not as a son, but as a man." Dominic moved quietly to the window, standing beside Dom Henry. Outside, Under the soft glow of a few lanterns strung across the barn, Alex was still working with Sombra. There was a quiet grace in his movements, a living image of an invisible legacy passed down not through blood, but through presence and devotion. "And when are you planning to tell Rory?" Dominic asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow," Dom Henry replied. "If you're willing. Together." Teresa joined them at the window, her silhouette delicately outlined against the fading light. "He may not take it easily. Rory carries the pride of the Basques." "Even if that pride isn't in his veins," Dominic said gently, "he has mine, and the stubbornness too, from what I saw today." A quiet smile curved Teresa's lips. "That he certainly has." The three stood together in silence, their thoughts drifting through the years that had slipped away, and those few that still remained. The moon rose beyond the distant hills, spilling silver light across the ranch, softening the edges of the present and blending past and future into something timeless. "I wonder," Dominic murmured after a long pause, "about what I taught your men today, about patience, about time, about respect." "And what does that have to do with this situation?" Dom Henry asked. The old horseman turned to them, his eyes calm, deep blue like lake water untouched by wind, carrying a wisdom that only years can give. "Maybe that's how we need to share the truth with Rory, not by forcing it, but by letting it unfold in its own time." Teresa lightly touched Dominic's arm, her fingers brushing the old scar that had long become part of him. "You've always been the wisest of us." "It's not wisdom," he said softly. "Just the lessons that time and solitude teach, if you're willing to listen." The next morning, beneath the rising sun stretching golden over the Virginia sky, three figures walked together toward the barn, where Rory was already tending to his daily work. Dominic, Teresa, and Dom Henry, no longer bound by secrets, but by a truth that had finally stepped into the light. In the nearby corral, Alex worked with Sombra, who now responded to him with the same quiet trust he'd once given the old horseman. Once feared as the Black Devil, the stallion had become a symbol of change, of something healing at the heart of that land. When Rory spotted the three approaching, something flickered in his eyes, as if a truth long buried had begun to rise before a single word had been said. "Son!" Teresa called gently, her voice carrying a rare tenderness not often heard in public. And under that sky, witness to so many untold stories, a new one began to unfold. Not one of power, but of recognition. Not of submission, but of belonging. And there you have it, my friends. While this story may be fictional, its impact feels incredibly real. Ironwind isn't just a tale about a wild stallion or a legendary horse whisperer. It's a deeply human story about forgiveness, truth, and the quiet power of patience. What moved me the most wasn't just the transformation of the Black Devil into Sombra, but the transformation of the people themselves. Dominic taught us something so often forgotten in today's world. That true strength isn't about control or dominance, it's about understanding. Whether it's with animals or with people, respect, time, and silence can heal wounds we thought would never close. This story also gently reminds us how secrets and pride can shape, and sometimes haunt, generations. But it also offers hope. That it's never too late to make things right, to return, to tell the truth, and to reconnect. It's not a real story, I know. But don't we all carry a bit of Dominic in us? A bit of Rory, maybe even a little of Teresa? We've all known loss, silence, and the longing to be understood. I'd love to hear what you took away from this story. Did something in it touch you personally? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your reflections are what keep this channel alive and growing. If this story stirred something in you, stay tuned, because there's so much more where this came from. And remember, sometimes the most powerful changes don't come with thunder. They arrive quietly, on the back of a black horse named Sombra. See you in the next story.